Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. Olympic National Forest, Washington State, October 15, 2019. James Jim Patterson kissed his 7-year-old daughter Emma's forehead as she sleepily ate her Cheerios, the familiar weight of his wedding ring catching the morning sunlight streaming through their kitchen window. "Daddy will be home for your bedtime story tonight, princess," he whispered, breathing in the sweet scent of her strawberry shampoo. His wife Sarah wrapped her arms around his waist from behind, her coffee-warmed breath tickling his neck. "Be careful out there, Ranger boy," she murmured, straightening his Forest Service badge with practiced fingers. "Emma's been practicing that new song she wants to sing for you." Jim's Motorola radio crackled to life at 6:47 a.m., shattering the peaceful morning routine. "All units, we have a missing person report. 23-year-old female Rachel Morrison, last seen near the abandoned Elwha River logging camp. Family reports she was hiking alone yesterday evening and never returned to her vehicle." The coffee turned bitter in Jim's mouth. He'd avoided that section of forest for good reason. The old logging camp had a reputation that went back decades. Local rangers called it the dead zone, where compass needles spun wildly and radio signals died without explanation. "I gotta go," he said, grabbing his Osprey pack already loaded with 35 pounds of survival gear. His Danner boots felt heavier than usual as he laced them, fingers trembling slightly. Something about this call felt different. Sarah's hand found his cheek. "You'll bring her home, Jim. You always do." The drive to the Elwha River access point took 43 minutes through winding mountain roads. Jim's iPhone X showed 3 bars of signal that would disappear once he entered the deeper forest. He pulled Rachel's photo from the missing person report. Blonde hair, bright smile, wearing a red REI jacket that should be easy to spot against the autumn foliage. His GPS coordinates led him to Rachel's abandoned Toyota Corolla, driver's door still unlocked, keys dangling from the ignition. Jim's training kicked in as he photographed the scene, noting the fresh tire tracks and the way her backpack was missing, but her water bottle remained in the cup holder. "Base, this is Ranger Patterson, located the subject's vehicle. Beginning ground search along Trail 847 toward the old logging site." Static answered him. Jim checked his radio. Full battery, proper frequency. He tried again. Nothing but electronic snow filled his earpiece. The forest felt wrong from the first step. Too quiet. No bird songs, no rustling of squirrels, not even the whisper of wind through the towering Douglas firs. The silence pressed against his eardrums like a physical weight. If this story's giving you chills, hit that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in James's situation? Comment below. Every ranger learned to read sign: broken twigs, disturbed earth, fabric caught on branches. Rachel's trail led deeper into the forest, her boot prints clear in the damp soil. But something was off about the spacing. The steps grew longer, more erratic, as if she'd begun running. Jim's phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "Emma drew you a picture of you saving people. She says you're her superhero. Love you." The message made his chest tighten. He had to find Rachel, had to get home to his girls. The logging camp ruins appeared through the trees like broken teeth. Concrete foundations jutted from the earth, overgrown with blackberry vines that seemed to writhe in the still air. A rusted metal building stood partially collapsed, its corrugated roof twisted into impossible angles. Rachel's red jacket hung from a nail protruding from the building's doorway, fluttering despite the absence of wind. Jim's heart hammered against his ribs. His breathing quickened as he approached the structure, every instinct screaming at him to turn back. The air grew cold, not autumn cold, but the bone-deep chill of something fundamentally wrong. "Rachel?" His voice cracked. "Rachel Morrison, this is Forest Service. Can you hear me?" The echo that returned wasn't quite right. It carried undertones that didn't match his words, syllables that stretched and twisted in the air. Inside the ruined building, Jim's flashlight beam revealed signs of recent habitation. A sleeping bag, empty water bottles, granola bar wrappers. But the space felt charged, like the air before a lightning strike. His compass needle spun wildly, unable to find magnetic north. A sound drifted from deeper in the structure, not quite human, not quite animal. It might have been crying. It might have been laughter. Jim's phone showed no signal, but the timestamp read 11:47 a.m. That was impossible. He'd only been hiking for 20 minutes. "Rachel, I'm here to help you." He pushed deeper into the building, following the sound. His boots crunched on broken glass and something that felt like bone fragments. The crying grew louder, and then he saw her. Rachel Morrison sat in the corner of the back room, knees drawn to her chest, rocking back and forth. But something was wrong with her silhouette. She seemed to flicker like a bad television signal, there one moment and translucent the next. "Oh God, Rachel!" Jim rushed forward, his hands reaching for her shoulders. His fingers passed through her like she was made of morning mist. Rachel's head turned toward him and Jim's bladder nearly released. Her eyes were pools of absolute black, and when she smiled, her teeth reflected his flashlight beam like polished obsidian. "She's not here anymore," Rachel's voice said, but the words came from everywhere at once, the walls, the ceiling, the broken glass beneath his feet. "She's become part of this place, like the others." Jim stumbled backward, his rational mind fighting against what he was seeing. Hallucination, carbon monoxide, anything but this. "You want to save her?" The thing wearing Rachel's face stood, and Jim could see through her body to the rotting wall behind. "Then stay. Become part of the camp. Feed the hunger that's been growing here since 1987. Images flashed through Jim's mind. Not his own memories, but older ones. Loggers working these woods in the 80s. A cave-in that trapped 6 men underground. Desperate families setting up camp here, waiting for rescue that never came. Grief and fear and rage soaking into the very foundations. The building began to groan around him, metal expanding and contracting despite the absence of heat. Shadows moved independently of his flashlight beam, reaching toward him with finger-like tendrils. Jim's wedding ring seemed to burn against his finger, and suddenly he could smell Sarah's perfume, hear Emma's laughter echoing from his memory, his family, his reason for living. "No." His voice gained strength. "I'm not staying. And neither is she." The thing that looked like Rachel hissed, the sound like steam escaping from a broken pipe. "You cannot take what belongs to the camp," but Jim was already moving, muscle memory from 15 years of search and rescue taking over. He grabbed Rachel's real jacket from the doorway nail and began backing toward the exit, keeping his eyes on the apparition. "I've got daughters at home," he said, his voice steady now. "A wife who's making my favorite dinner tonight. A little girl who needs her daddy to read her bedtime stories. I'm not dying in this godforsaken place." The building shuddered, and for a moment, Jim saw the truth. The real Rachel Morrison was there, unconscious but breathing, half buried under debris in what had once been the camp's mess hall. The entity had been using her image, feeding off her life force while keeping her hidden. Jim lunged forward, his hands closing around solid flesh and bone. Rachel's pulse was weak but steady. She was hypothermic, dehydrated, but alive. The shadows screamed. Jim hoisted Rachel over his shoulder in a fireman's carry and ran. Behind them, the entire structure began to collapse, metal and concrete grinding together in sounds that hurt to hear. The shadows gave chase, reaching through the walls like grasping hands. His compass spun wildly, but Jim didn't need it. He followed the pull of his wedding ring, the magnetic draw of love that transcended any supernatural force. Home, family, everything worth fighting for. The forest erupted back to life as he cleared the ruins. Bird songs returning, wind resuming its whisper through the branches. His radio crackled with voices calling his name. "Base, this is Patterson. Found the subject. She's alive but needs immediate medical attention. Request emergency airlift to my coordinates." Rachel stirred in his arms as the helicopter's rotors thundered overhead. Her eyes, brown, normal, human, focused on his face. "Thank you," she whispered. Jim's phone buzzed with another message from Sarah. "Emma's practicing her song. She can't wait to perform for her hero tonight." That evening, Jim sat in his daughter's bedroom, her small hand clasped in his as she sang the song she'd been practicing. "You Are My Sunshine." Rachel Morrison was recovering at Harborview Medical Center. Her family gathered around her bed. The official report would list exposure and mild hypothermia as the cause of Rachel's condition. Jim never mentioned the ruins, the shadows, or the entity that had tried to claim them both. Some truths were too dangerous to share. But as Emma's voice filled the room with love and light, Jim knew he'd made the right choice. Some forces in the world were darker than any training could prepare you for. But love, real love for family, was stronger than all of them. Holy crap, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like, if you want more terrifying forest ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror. And comment your theory about what really happened to Rachel. I read every one. The emergency radio crackled to life at 6:47 a.m., cutting through the peaceful morning silence of Cascade National Forest Ranger Station. Matthew Chen jolted awake in his narrow bunk, coffee mug still warm in his hand from the pre-dawn shift change. Unit 47, we have a missing person report. 22-year-old female Brittany Walsh disappeared yesterday evening near Whispering Pines Trail. Family's been calling all night. Matt grabbed his radio with practiced efficiency, though his stomach tightened. 3 weeks into his transfer from the Arizona desert parks, he was still learning these dense Washington woods. Every trail looked the same. Every shadow seemed deeper than it should be. Unit 47 responding. What's the last known location? Trailhead parking lot. Her Honda Civic's still there, keys inside. Hiking boots missing from the trunk. Family says she was meeting someone but won't say who. Matt pulled on his regulation boots, the leather still stiff and unmarked by local terrain. His gear bag felt heavier than usual as he loaded it into the Ford Ranger. GPS unit, emergency beacon, first aid kit, enough supplies for a 2-day search if needed. The morning air carried an unusual chill for October, and thick fog clung to the tree line like wet cotton. At the trailhead, Brittany's silver Honda sat exactly as described. Matt photographed the scene, noting the hiking boots missing from the otherwise perfectly organized trunk. A family photo tucked into the sun visor showed a young woman with bright eyes and an infectious smile, surrounded by what looked like parents and younger siblings at some beach vacation. His radio buzzed. "Ranger Chen, this is Patricia Walsh, Brittany's mother. Please, you have to find her. She's all we have left after the accident." The woman's voice cracked with barely controlled hysteria. Matt had heard that tone before. The specific terror of a parent whose child had simply vanished into wilderness that could hide secrets forever. "Ma'am, I'm going to find her. Can you tell me anything about who she was meeting?" A long pause filled with stifled sobbing. She wouldn't say, just that it was someone from her past. Someone who knew our family before we moved here 5 years ago. Matt started up the Whispering Pines Trail at 8:15 a.m., his fresh boots already collecting the damp earth and fallen leaves. The path wound through old-growth firs whose massive trunks disappeared into the fog above. Everything smelled of pine needles, wet moss, and something else, something metallic that reminded him of blood, though he pushed the thought away. 20 minutes in, he found the first sign, a piece of fabric caught on a blackberry bush about 15 feet off the main trail. The material was soft, expensive looking, definitely from women's clothing. Matt bagged it carefully and marked the GPS coordinates, then followed the faint path deeper into the woods. The trees grew closer together here, their canopy so thick that even mid-morning felt like twilight. Matt's radio reception started cutting in and out, filled with static that almost sounded like whispers. He adjusted the frequency twice, but the interference only grew worse. That's when he noticed the shadows were wrong. It started subtle, a peripheral sense that darkness was moving independently of the wind-blown branches above. Matt stopped walking and focused, but when he looked directly, everything appeared normal. Just forest shadows doing what forest shadows do. But they kept moving when the wind was still. Stress, he muttered to himself, taking a drink from his water bottle. New job, new place, missing person case. Of course you're seeing things. His Arizona training had been all about heat exposure and dehydration. Nobody had prepared him for how these dense woods could play tricks on your mind, how the constant twilight under the canopy could make time feel suspended. Another piece of fabric, this one caught higher up on a pine branch. Brittany had definitely come this way, but the spacing of the evidence suggested she'd been moving fast, running maybe, or being chased. Matt's pulse quickened as he followed the increasingly faint trail deeper into timber that grew older and more twisted with each step. The shadows definitely weren't right now. They stretched in directions that defied the filtered sunlight, pooling in areas that should have been brighter. Worse, they seemed to pulse with their own rhythm, like a slow heartbeat. Matt's radio suddenly burst to life with crystal clarity. "Unit 47, what's your status?" He nearly jumped out of his skin. "Unit 47 here. Following evidence trail approximately 1.2 miles northeast of Trailhead. Found clothing fragments, continuing pursuit." "Copy that. Be advised, we've had 3 other disappearances in that area over the past 2 years. Local search and rescue recommends extreme caution." Matt's blood went cold. 3 others? Why wasn't this in my briefing materials? Static filled the channel, then silence. When the voice returned, it sounded different. Distorted, almost echoing. "Because some things can't be written in reports, Ranger Chen. Some things live in the spaces between words." "Base, repeat that transmission. You're breaking up." Nothing but static. Matt checked his phone. No signal bars at all. The GPS unit showed his location clearly, but something was wrong with the topographical display. According to the device, he was standing in the middle of a lake that definitely wasn't there. The shadows around him suddenly deepened, as if clouds had passed over the sun. But when Matt looked up through the canopy, he could see patches of blue sky and bright morning light. The darkness was coming from somewhere else, somewhere below, or perhaps from the trees themselves. That's when he heard Brittany scream. The sound cut through the forest like a blade, raw and terrified and definitely human. It came from ahead and to the left, maybe 200 yards through the densest part of the timber. Matt broke into a run, crashing through underbrush and dodging low branches, his radio bouncing against his chest as he fought his way toward the sound. "Brittany, Brittany, call out if you can hear me." Another scream, closer now, but there was something wrong with it. The sound seemed to echo from multiple directions at once, as if the forest itself was throwing her voice around like a cruel game. Matt burst into a small clearing and stopped dead. Brittany Walsh stood in the center of the open space, her back to him, perfectly still. She wore hiking clothes that matched the fabric he'd been following, but something about her posture was wrong, too rigid, like a mannequin positioned by someone with only a vague understanding of human anatomy. "Brittany," Matt called softly, approaching with one hand on his radio. "I'm Ranger Chen. Your family sent me to find you." She didn't move or respond. Matt circled around to see her face and immediately wished he hadn't. Her eyes were open but completely black. Not just the pupils, but the entire visible surface, like someone had filled them with crude oil. Her mouth hung slack, and when she breathed, the sound was wrong. Too deep, too rhythmic, like an old bellows working. "Jesus Christ," Matt whispered, stepping backward. He grabbed for his radio. "Base, this is Unit 47. I need immediate medical evacuation. Found the missing person, but she's in some kind of medical distress." The radio crackled. "No one's coming, Matthew." It was Brittany's voice coming through the speaker, though her lips hadn't moved. "The shadows here are hungry," the radio continued in her voice. "They've been feeding on people like us for generations. People who wander off the marked trails. People who think they understand how the world works." Matt backed toward the tree line, but the shadows there seemed to writhe and reach for him with grasping tendrils that couldn't possibly be real. Behind him, the Brittany thing finally turned around, moving with jerky, unnatural motions. "You're new here," she said with her own mouth now, though the voice still sounded hollow and wrong. You don't know about the old treaties. The agreements our people made with theirs. What people? What are you talking about? Matt's training kicked in despite his terror. Keep the subject talking. Gather information. Stay calm. But staying calm was impossible when the shadows around the clearing had started moving like living things, rising up from the ground in tendrils and sheets of darkness that blocked out the filtered sunlight completely. The Walsh family, Brittany continued, taking a step toward him. We've been feeding the shadow people for 3 generations. Every few years, someone has to cross over, someone has to join them. That's impossible. You're sick, Brittany. We need to get you to a hospital. She laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass. I died yesterday, Matthew, right here in this clearing, but they let me come back to collect the next offering. The shadows surged upward like a black tide, and Matt finally understood why his GPS couldn't map this place properly. It existed in the spaces between normal geography, in the gaps where maps failed and compasses spun uselessly. He ran. Behind him, Brittany's voice called out with inhuman volume. You can't leave, Matthew. The shadows know you're sent now. They'll follow you back to town, back to everyone you care about. Matt crashed through the forest, branches tearing at his uniform and gear bouncing wildly. His radio screamed with static and voices. Some he recognized from base, others that spoke in languages he'd never heard. The shadows flowed between the trees like liquid darkness, always just behind him, always reaching. He burst onto the main trail after what felt like hours, but his watch insisted had been only minutes. The normalcy of the marked path hit him like a physical blow. Clean gravel, distance markers, even a family with small children hiking peacefully in the opposite direction. Hey, he called to them, but they walked past as if he didn't exist. Matt looked down at himself and understood why. His uniform was shredded and filthy, his face scratched and bleeding. But worse than that, his shadow on the trail wasn't behaving normally. It moved independently, gesturing to the dark spaces between the trees as if inviting other shadows to follow. His radio crackled one final time with perfect clarity. Welcome to Cascade National Forest, Matthew. We've been waiting for someone like you for a very long time. At the trailhead parking lot, Matt found 2 Honda Civics instead of 1. Both silver, both with the same license plate, both containing the same family photo of Brittany Walsh. He drove back to the ranger station with his shadow writhing in the rearview mirror, finally understanding that some disappearances are really recruitment drives. His first official report about Brittany Walsh would list her as missing, search ongoing. By the time he wrote his second report 3 days later, about a missing hiker named Matthew Chen, he would understand that the shadows had always been patient. They could wait another generation if necessary. If this story gave you chills, what would you do in Matthew's situation? Comment below. That ending hit different. Did it blow your mind? Like if you want more terrifying forest ranger horror, follow for daily supernatural stories, and comment your theory about what really happened to Brittany. My name is Michael, and at 6:47 a.m. on October 15, 2019, my radio crackled with the call that would shatter my understanding of reality itself. I was sitting in my Ford Ranger outside the Yellowstone North entrance, sipping coffee from the thermos Sarah had filled for me, still tasting her goodbye kiss on my lips when dispatch's voice cut through the morning static. Ranger Sullivan, we have a code yellow, 16-year-old female Emma Martinez, failed to return from solo day hike yesterday on the Specimen Ridge Trail. Family's at the station now. The coffee turned bitter in my mouth as I keyed the radio. Copy that, dispatch. ETA to station 15 minutes. I cranked the engine, the dashboard clock reading exactly 6:47 a.m., and felt that familiar knot form in my stomach, the one that always appeared when a kid went missing. 23 years wearing this uniform, and I'd never gotten used to that feeling. In my shirt pocket, Sophie's latest crayon drawing of our family crinkled as I reached for my gear bag, her stick figure version of me wearing my ranger hat and the words, "Best Daddy," scrawled in purple letters across the bottom. The drive to the station took exactly 13 minutes through the crisp Wyoming morning, aspen leaves golden against the deep blue sky that promised a beautiful day for searching. I could smell autumn in the air, That mixture of dying leaves, cold mountain streams, and the first hint of snow that would come soon. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Sophie wants to make pancakes when you get home. Stay safe. Love you. I voice texted back while stopped at a light. Tell her I'll be home for breakfast. Love you both. At the station, I found the Martinez family clustered around Ranger Thompson's desk, like moths drawn to a flame of hope. Mrs. Martinez looked like she hadn't slept, her eyes red-rimmed and desperate, clutching a photo of a smiling teenager with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She's never done anything like this, she was saying, her voice breaking. Emma always checks in. Always. She was supposed to call by 6 p.m. yesterday. Mr. Martinez stood behind his wife, one hand on her shoulder, his face grim. She's got her phone, GPS watch, emergency whistle, everything you're supposed to have. But we haven't heard anything since she texted us at 2:30 yesterday afternoon saying she was starting the trail. He looked up at me with the kind of desperation that every parent fears they'll someday feel. Please, Ranger Sullivan, you have to find our daughter. I sat down across from them, pulling out my incident report pad, the worn leather cover smooth from years of use. Tell me everything about yesterday. What time did Emma leave? What was she wearing? Did she mention meeting anyone or going anywhere specific? The familiar routine of information gathering helped calm my own nerves. Each detail another piece of the puzzle that would lead me to bring their daughter home. She left the hotel at 8 a.m., Mrs. Martinez said, consulting her phone. She was wearing her blue North Face jacket, black hiking pants, red hiking boots, the expensive ones we got her for her birthday. She had her blue JanSport backpack with water, energy bars, first aid kit. She's been hiking since she was little. She knows what she's doing. The details painted a picture of a prepared, experienced hiker, which made the disappearance more concerning, not less. In my experience, it was usually the overconfident ones who got into the worst trouble. I glanced at the station clock. 7:15 a.m. What time did she say she'd be back? 6 p.m. at the latest, Mr. Martinez replied. She was planning to do the full loop, about 8 miles. Said it would take her most of the day with photo stops. She wants to be a nature photographer. His voice caught on the present tense, hope and fear warring in every word. I stood up, clipping my radio to my belt and checking my gear. GPS unit, extra batteries, emergency beacon, first aid kit, water purification tablets, emergency blanket, flares. The familiar weight of survival equipment that had saved my ass more times than I could count. I'm going to find her, I promised, looking both parents in the eye. I've been working these mountains for over 2 decades. I know every trail, every hiding spot, every place someone might take shelter. I'll bring Emma home. The drive to the Specimen Ridge trailhead took 45 minutes through increasingly remote terrain, my radio crackling with updates from other rangers beginning their own search patterns. The October morning was crisp, maybe 45 degrees, with thin cloud cover that would burn off by noon. Perfect hiking weather, which made Emma's disappearance even more puzzling. I parked at the trailhead and stepped out, immediately noticing something that made my ranger instincts prickle. Absolute silence. Not normal forest quiet, total, unnatural silence. No bird calls, no insect buzz, no wind through the trees. Even my footsteps on the gravel seemed muffled, wrong somehow. The silence pressed against my eardrums like physical weight, making me want to clear my ears constantly. I grabbed my pack from the truck bed, the sound of the zipper unnaturally loud in the dead air. The trailhead register showed Emma's signature from yesterday at 8:47 a.m. Neat, careful handwriting that matched a responsible teenager who followed safety protocols. Below her entry, the page was blank until my own signature at 8:23 a.m. today. I photographed the page with my phone and headed up the trail, my boots crunching on fallen leaves that should have rustled with life, but instead sounded like walking on broken glass. The Specimen Ridge Trail starts with a gradual incline through dense lodgepole pine forest, the kind of terrain where you can see 30 yards in any direction if you know how to read the spaces between trees. I'd walked this trail hundreds of times, knew every switchback, every creek crossing, every spot where inexperienced hikers typically got confused. But today, something felt fundamentally wrong about the familiar landscape. At the first mile marker, I found Emma's first piece of sign, a partial boot print in a muddy section where Cottonwood Creek crossed the trail. Size 7, distinctive tread pattern that matched the description of her red hiking boots. The print pointed uphill, confirming she'd made it this far. I photographed it, marked the GPS coordinates, and called it in to dispatch. Found sign at mile marker 1, continuing uphill. But as I studied the print more carefully, something nagged at me. The mud around it looked fresh, too fresh for a print that should be nearly 24 hours old. The edges were sharp, defined, as if she'd just passed through minutes ago. I knelt down, touching the mud with my gloved finger. Still wet, still soft. That wasn't possible. The trail continued climbing through a series of switchbacks that gained elevation steadily toward the ridge proper. At each turn, I found more sign, a scuff mark on a rock, a broken branch at shoulder height, another partial boot print. But each piece of evidence looked impossibly fresh, as if Emma was just ahead of me, just around the next bend. The wrongness of it made my skin crawl, but I pushed forward, driven by the promise I'd made to her parents. If this story is giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Michael's situation? Comment below. At mile marker 3, the trail opened into a small meadow where wildflowers should have been dormant for the season. Instead, I found them in full summer bloom. Impossible lupines and paintbrush flowers that should have been dead for weeks. The sight stopped me cold, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. Even more disturbing, Emma's boot prints led directly across the meadow, but as I followed them, they seemed to loop back on themselves in patterns that defied physics. I pulled out my phone to call for backup, but the screen showed 2:47 p.m. That wasn't right. I'd left the trailhead just after 8:30 a.m., and even with careful tracking, I hadn't been hiking for more than 2 hours. But my watch showed the same time, 2:47 p.m. The sun's position in the sky confirmed it. Somehow hours had passed without me noticing. "Base, this is Sullivan," I radioed, trying to keep the confusion out of my voice. "I'm at mile marker 3, but I'm showing 2:47 p.m. on my time. Can you confirm?" Static answered me, then more static. I checked my radio. Full battery, clear signal strength. "Base, do you copy?" Nothing but the electronic hiss of empty frequencies. The silence around me deepened, if that was possible. Even my own breathing seemed muffled, as if the air itself was absorbing sound. I continued following Emma's trail across the meadow, her boot prints clear in the soft earth. But as I walked, I began to notice something that made my blood run cold. My own footprints were appearing in the trail ahead of me. Not behind me, where they should be. Ahead of me. Size 11. Danner hiking boots with the distinctive wear pattern on the left heel where I'd scraped it on a rock last summer. But I hadn't walked this section of trail yet. I was walking it now for the first time today, following my own footprints that somehow already existed. I stopped walking and stared at the impossible tracks. My hands began to shake, not from cold, but from a primal fear that something fundamental about reality was breaking down around me. In my pocket, Sophie's drawing crinkled as I unconsciously clutched it, her innocent crayon family becoming my anchor to a world that made sense. "What the hell is happening here?" I whispered to the dead air, and my voice echoed back wrong, arriving from directions where I hadn't spoken. The trail led into a grove of ancient pines, their trunks easily 4 feet in diameter, the kind of old-growth trees that had been standing when the first explorers mapped this region. As I entered the grove, the temperature dropped noticeably, not gradually, but all at once, like walking into a meat freezer. My breath began to mist, and frost started forming on the evergreen needles despite the afternoon sun. Emma's tracks continued through the grove, but now they were accompanied by something else. Other footprints that looked exactly like hers, dozens of them all heading in different directions. Some went deeper into the trees, some doubled back toward the meadow, some led to trees and simply stopped, as if she'd walked into the bark and disappeared. I followed the freshest-looking set, my heart hammering against my ribs. The prints led to a clearing in the center of the grove where a massive granite boulder sat like an altar. And there, Sitting on the rock with her back to me was a figure in a blue North Face jacket. "Emma?" I called out, relief flooding through me. "Emma Martinez." The figure didn't respond. I approached carefully, noting that she was sitting perfectly still, not moving at all. "Emma, I'm Ranger Sullivan. Your parents sent me to find you." As I got closer, I could see that she was staring straight ahead at something I couldn't see. Her dark hair was pulled back in the same ponytail as in the photograph, and she was wearing exactly what her parents had described. But something was wrong with the way she sat. Too still, too rigid, like a mannequin positioned for display. "Emma?" I reached out to touch her shoulder, and my hand passed right through her. The figure flickered like a television with bad reception, then vanished completely. I stood alone in the clearing, my heart rate spiking as adrenaline flooded my system. Where Emma had been sitting, the rock was covered with a thin layer of frost that spelled out words in letters I could barely read. 2:47 p.m. forever. I stumbled backward, my rational mind struggling to process what I'd just witnessed. Hallucination brought on by altitude and stress, I told myself. Dehydration, low blood sugar. But my GPS unit was spinning wildly, unable to lock onto satellites, and my watch face was flickering between times. 2:47 p.m., 2:47 p.m., 2:47 p.m. over and over again. From somewhere in the trees around me, I heard Emma's voice. "Help me, I'm stuck. I can't get out." I spun toward the sound but saw nothing. "Where are you? Keep talking." "I've been walking the same section for hours." Her voice came from a different direction now. "Every time I reach the meadow, I'm back at the boulder. Every time I try to leave, I end up here. What time is it?" "It's..." I looked at my watch. Still 2:47 p.m. "It's 2:47 in the afternoon. Where are you? I can hear you, but I can't see you." 2:47, she repeated, and I could hear tears in her voice. "It's always 2:47. I've been walking since 2:47 yesterday. The sun never moves. The shadows never change. I'm so tired, but I can't sleep because time won't pass." The horror of what she was describing hit me like a physical blow. Trapped in a single moment, conscious and aware but unable to move forward in time. It was the kind of cosmic nightmare that human minds weren't equipped to handle. "Emma, listen to me. I'm going to get you out of this. But I need you to tell me exactly what happened when you first got here." "I was taking pictures of the boulder," her disembodied voice replied. "There was a man here, an old man in clothes that looked wrong. Old-fashioned. He said he was lost, asked me what time it was. When I told him it was 2:47, he smiled and said, 'Perfect.' Then everything stopped. Around me, the ancient pines began to creak and groan despite the absence of wind. The sound was wrong, too rhythmic, like a massive clock mechanism grinding through broken gears. The temperature continued to drop, and my breath came in thick white puffs that hung in the air far longer than they should have. "The old man," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What did he look like?" "Tall, really thin. He was wearing a suit that looked like it was from the 1800s, but his eyes..." Emma's voice cracked. "His eyes were like looking into empty space. Not black, not any color, just nothing. And when he smiled, I could see that he had too many teeth." I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. In 23 years of ranger work, I'd dealt with lost hikers, medical emergencies, wildlife encounters, and every variety of human stupidity. But nothing in my experience had prepared me for this. "Emma, I need you to stay calm. Can you see me right now?" "No," she whispered. "I can hear you, but I can't see anything except the boulder and the trees. It's like I'm in a snow globe, but the same scene over and over. Sometimes I see other people walking the trail, but when I call to them, they can't hear me." Other people. I thought about the multiple sets of Emma's footprints I'd found, all leading in different directions. "How many times have you walked this loop?" "I don't know. Hundreds? Thousands?" I tried counting at first, but the numbers don't stick. Everything resets except my memory. I remember every single time I've walked from here to the meadow and back. Every step, every breath, but my watch always says 2:47. The grinding sound from the trees grew louder, and I began to notice that the shadows on the ground were moving in small, jerky increments, not smoothly like normal shadows following the sun, but like the hands of a clock ticking from one position to another. The wrongness of it made my stomach churn. Emma, I think something is feeding on you being trapped here. Some kind of entity that feeds on temporal loops. We need to break the cycle. I had no idea if that was true, but it felt right in a horrible cosmic way. When you try to leave, what happens exactly? I start walking toward the meadow, she said, her voice getting fainter. Everything looks normal until I get to the edge of the trees. Then I blink and I'm back at the boulder every single time. I pulled out my phone to try calling for backup again, but the screen was now showing dozens of time displays, all flickering rapidly between different moments. 2:47:23 p.m., 2:47:18 p.m., 2:47:31 p.m., cycling through the same minute over and over. The battery indicator jumped from full to empty and back again in rhythm with the flickering. From the direction of the meadow came a sound that made my blood freeze. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps on the forest floor, but with the wrong rhythm. Too precise, too mechanical. And with each step, the temperature dropped another degree. "He's coming back," Emma whispered, her voice now barely audible. "The old man. He comes to check on me sometimes. He always asks what time it is, and I always have to tell him 2:47. He smiles every time like it's the funniest joke in the world." The footsteps stopped at the edge of the clearing. I turned toward the sound but saw nothing except empty forest. But the silence that followed was different from the unnatural quiet I'd been experiencing. This was the silence of something massive holding its breath. "Good afternoon," came a voice like rustling leaves and grinding stone. "Might I inquire as to the current time?" I spun around, and there he was, impossibly tall and thin, wearing a black suit that looked like it belonged in a daguerreotype. His skin was pale as bone, and when he smiled I saw what Emma meant about too many teeth. Rows and rows of them, like a shark's mouth grafted onto a human face. But his eyes were the worst part, not empty, but filled with something vast and incomprehensible, like looking into the space between stars. "I asked you a question," he said, his voice coming from everywhere and nowhere. "What time is it?" Every instinct screamed at me not to answer, but my mouth opened against my will. 2:47 p.m. His smile widened impossibly. "Perfect. Simply perfect. Time is such a precious thing, don't you think? Most humans waste it so carelessly, letting it slip through their fingers like water. But here, in my little pocket of eternity, time becomes truly valuable. One perfect moment, preserved forever." I forced my hand to move toward my radio, but my movements felt sluggish, like moving through thick syrup. "Let her go. Take me instead," he laughed, and the sound was like clock gears stripping their teeth. "Oh, but I'm not taking anyone. I'm giving the gift of infinite time. Your young friend has experienced more moments than most humans live in their entire lifespans. She has become intimate with the very fabric of temporal existence." "That's not living," I managed to say. "That's torture." "Is it?" He tilted his head at an angle that was just wrong enough to make my vision blur. "Consider. She will never age, never die, never lose the people she loves to the ravages of time. She has achieved a kind of immortality that kings and emperors have dreamed of for millennia." Around us, the forest began to change. The trees grew taller and older, their bark becoming rough and ancient. The clearing expanded and contracted like a breathing lung. The granite boulder shifted and flowed like liquid stone. Reality was becoming unstable, warping around this entity's presence. "What are you?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "I am what remains when time forgets to move forward," he replied. "I am the pause between seconds, the gap between heartbeats, the moment of hesitation before thought becomes action. Humans call me many names, but names are for things that exist in linear time. I simply am." My watch face cracked, and through the fracture, I could see thousands of tiny clocks, all showing 2:47 p.m., all ticking in perfect unison. The sound was hypnotic, seductive, promising an end to worry and pain and the terrible forward rush of mortality. "Join us," the entity whispered, and its voice was inside my head now. "Bring your daughter here. Bring your wife. Give them the gift of forever. No more goodbyes, no more loss, no more watching your little girl grow up and move away and forget her father. Just one perfect moment, preserved in amber, treasured for eternity." For a terrifying instant, I felt myself tempted. Sophie would never have to face the dangers of growing up. Sarah would never have to worry about me not coming home. We could be frozen in a moment of pure love, our family complete and safe forever. But then I heard Emma's voice, small and broken. "Please don't leave me here alone." The spell shattered. This thing wasn't offering preservation. It was offering a kind of death worse than death. An eternity of consciousness without growth, without change, without hope. I thought of Sophie's drawing in my pocket, her stick figures holding hands under a crayon sun, and I felt something ignite in my chest. "No," I said, and the word came out stronger than I felt. Time isn't meant to stop. Growth isn't something to be afraid of. My daughter is going to grow up and make her own choices and live her own life, and that's exactly what's supposed to happen. The entity's smile faded, and for the first time it looked genuinely surprised. "You would choose decay over preservation? Pain over perfection?" "I choose life," I said, pulling Sophie's drawing from my pocket. The crayon colors seemed to glow in the unnatural twilight. Real life, with all the messiness and uncertainty and beautiful imperfection that comes with it. The entity hissed, and the sound was like steam escaping from a broken pipe. "Then you choose to watch everything you love crumble to dust." "I choose to love it while it's here," I replied and took a step forward. "Now let Emma go." The clearing began to spin around us, trees blurring into streaks of brown and green. The granite boulder cracked down the middle, and from the fissure came a sound like a massive clock breaking. The entity's form began to waver and stretch, becoming less human and more like a tear in the fabric of reality itself. "Time is an ocean," it shrieked, its voice distorting. "You are all just droplets evaporating in the sun. I offer permanence and you choose dissolution." "I choose change," I said, and crushed Sophie's drawing against my chest. The crayon wax melted under my touch, staining my uniform with bright colors. "I choose tomorrow and the day after that and all the tomorrows that come after." The entity let out a sound like the universe screaming, and suddenly Emma was there. Not a flicker or a vision, but solid and real, stumbling toward me with tears streaming down her face. "Ranger Sullivan? Is it really you?" I caught her as she collapsed, her body shaking with exhaustion and relief. She felt real, warm, human, gloriously, imperfectly human. "I've got you," I said. "I've got you. What time is it?" She looked at her GPS watch, and her face broke into a smile of pure joy. 3:12 p.m. It's 3:12 p.m. and the seconds are moving. Behind us, the entity was collapsing in on itself, becoming a shrinking point of impossible darkness. "This is not over," it hissed as it disappeared. "Time always wins in the end. Everything you love will age and die and be forgotten." "Maybe," I said to the empty air where it had been, "but they'll live first, and that's what matters." The forest around us shuddered and snapped back to normal like a rubber band returning to shape. Birdsongs filled the air, insects buzzed, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves. The granite boulder was just a boulder again, and the ancient pines were just very old trees. Emma and I made it back to the trailhead as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that meant the day was ending and tomorrow would begin. Her parents were waiting with the search and rescue team, and the reunion was everything a happy ending should be: tears and hugs and promises and gratitude. But as I drove home to my own family, I couldn't shake the entity's final words. Everything I loved would age and die and be forgotten. Sarah would grow old, Sophie would grow up and move away, and someday I would be nothing but a name on a headstone. But when I walked through my front door and Sophie ran to me yelling, "Daddy," and Sarah kissed me and asked how my day was, I realized something the entity couldn't understand. The temporary nature of love didn't make it less valuable. It made it infinitely precious. We had pancakes for dinner that night, Sophie chattering about her school day while Sarah held my hand under the table. Outside, time moved forward the way it was supposed to, carrying us all toward an uncertain future that might hold heartbreak and loss and 1,000 different kinds of pain. And I wouldn't trade a single ticking second of it for all the frozen eternities in the universe. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like if you want more terrifying Ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror, and comment your theory about what really happened to Emma. I read every single one. October 15th, 2018, Great Smoky Mountains National Park, Tennessee Ranger. John Mitchell's boots crunched through the amber carpet of fallen leaves as he made his way down the Alum Cave Trail, the familiar weight of his radio clipped to his vest, and the reassuring bulk of his Garmin GPS unit secure in his breast pocket. The morning air carried that sharp October bite that reminded him of his daughter Emma's soccer games, the way she'd blow on her hands between plays while his wife Sarah cheered from the sidelines with steaming coffee. He'd promised Emma he'd be home for dinner tonight. Spaghetti and meatballs, her favorite. The thought brought a small smile to his weathered face as he checked his watch. 7:43 a.m. Plenty of time for a routine patrol and to be back at the station by 4. That was before he saw the impossible. The young woman came into view around the bend ahead, maybe 25, with auburn hair tied back in a practical ponytail. She wore a bright blue jacket that stood out against the muted autumn colors like a beacon. Jessica something. He'd seen her name on the trail register that morning. Jessica Collins from Nashville, hiking solo. Not the smartest choice, but people did it all the time. "Morning," John called out as they approached each other on the narrow trail. "Beautiful day for a hike." "Absolutely gorgeous," she replied, her voice carrying that slight Tennessee drawl. "I can't believe how perfect the weather is, like something out of a postcard." John nodded, automatically scanning her gear with a professional eye. Good boots, proper pack, water bottles visible. She looked prepared. "You taking the trail all the way up to the bluffs?" "That's the plan. My first time on this one, actually. I've heard the views are incredible." "They are. Just watch your footing near the top. Those rocks can be slippery this time of year with the morning dew." The words felt normal, routine, the kind of friendly ranger advice he'd given 1,000 times. Jessica smiled and adjusted her pack straps. "Thanks for the heads up. I'll be careful." And then it happened. As John watched, Jessica took another step forward on the trail. Her boot touched the packed earth where hundreds of hikers had walked safely before her. But instead of the solid contact that physics demanded, her foot simply passed through. Not fell through, not broke through, passed through, as if the ground itself had become nothing more substantial than morning mist. John's rational mind immediately began cataloging explanations. Hidden sinkhole, optical illusion, some kind of covered pit trap. But even as these thoughts raced through his head, he was watching Jessica's entire body descend into solid earth with the smooth, inevitable motion of someone sinking into deep water. Her eyes met his as she slipped downward, and the confusion on her face mirrored his own. No fear yet. Just that startled bewilderment of someone whose reality had suddenly shifted without warning. "What the—" John lunged forward, his hand reaching for hers, but she was already chest-deep in ground that looked no different than it had seconds before. Solid, packed trail dirt and fallen leaves. No disturbance, no hole. "Help me!" Jessica's voice carried a note of panic now as she tried to grab onto something, anything, but her hands passed through rocks and tree roots as if they were illusions. John dropped to his knees at the spot where she was sinking, his hands frantically clawing at earth that felt completely normal under his palms. Solid, real, unmovable. But Jessica continued to sink. "I've got you, hold on." He grabbed for her outstretched hand and for just a moment felt her fingers. Warm, solid, undeniably real. Then they slipped through his grip like smoke. Her face disappeared below the surface of the trail. John stared at the spot where she'd vanished, his breathing coming in sharp, controlled bursts. The ground showed no sign of disturbance. No hole, no depression. No indication that anything unusual had occurred. Just the normal forest floor, scattered with oak and maple leaves in shades of gold and crimson. He pressed his palms against the earth again, pushing, probing, solid as bedrock. "This isn't happening," he said aloud, his voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. "This is not happening." But the forest around him felt different now. The morning bird song had stopped. Not gradually, the way it might when a predator moved through, but instantly, as if someone had pressed a mute button on the entire ecosystem. The temperature had dropped at least 10 degrees, his breath now visible in small puffs. John's radio crackled to life. "Unit 7, this is base. Radio check." His hand moved automatically to the radio, muscle memory taking over while his mind struggled to process what he'd witnessed. "Base, this is Unit 7. I have a situation on Alum Cave Trail, approximately 1 mile from the trailhead." "Copy that, Unit 7. What's your situation?" John stared at the undisturbed ground. How could he possibly explain this? I witnessed what appears to be a missing hiker. Female, mid-20s, last seen wearing a blue jacket. I need backup in search and rescue." "Copy, Unit 7. Can you confirm the nature of the disappearance?" The rational part of John's mind, the part that had gotten him through 15 years of law enforcement and 5 years as a park ranger, insisted on finding a logical explanation. Underground cave system. Sudden sinkhole that had somehow sealed itself. Elaborate practical joke, though who would go to such lengths and how they'd manage it was beyond him. But deep in his gut, in a place that predated logic and reason, he knew he'd witnessed something that wasn't supposed to exist. "Unit 7, please respond." "Base, John's voice caught. He'd built his entire worldview on facts, evidence, rational explanation. He was the guy who debunked ghost stories around the campfire, who explained away mysterious sounds and unexplained phenomena with science and common sense. "Base, I witnessed the hiker disappear. I was speaking with her and she's gone. I need immediate assistance." The silence on the radio stretched longer than it should have. "Copy, Unit 7. Dispatching additional units to your location. Maintain position and continue search efforts." John clipped the radio back to his vest and forced himself to his feet. His legs felt unsteady, but his training kicked in. Search pattern, evidence collection, witness statements, though he was apparently the only witness to the impossible. He pulled out his smartphone and began taking photos of the area, though the images showed nothing but normal forest floor. Then he started a methodical search pattern, moving in expanding circles from the spot where Jessica had vanished. That's when he heard the voice. "Help me!" Faint, muffled as if coming from underground. John dropped to his knees again, pressing his ear to the earth. "Jessica! Jessica, can you hear me?" "I'm here. I'm still here. Why is it so dark?" The voice seemed to come from directly beneath him, but also from everywhere at once. John grabbed his radio again. "Base, I'm getting voice contact with the missing hiker. She appears to be trapped underground. I need geological survey and heavy rescue equipment." "Copy, Unit 7. Additional units are en route. Estimated arrival 15 minutes." John continued pressing his hands against the ground, feeling for any soft spots, any indication of a subsurface cavity. Nothing, but Jessica's voice continued growing fainter. "So cold. Why is it so cold?" "Jessica, stay with me. Help is coming. Can you move? Can you feel any openings around you?" The temperature continued to drop. John's breath came in thick clouds now, and frost was beginning to form on the fallen leaves. In October, in Tennessee, when the weather forecast had called for a high of 72 degrees. "I can see them," Jessica's voice whispered, so faint now that John had to strain to hear it. "See who? Jessica, see who?" "The others, they've been waiting so long." A chill that had nothing to do with the supernatural temperature drop ran down John's spine. What others? Jessica, what others? But there was no response. The forest had fallen into complete silence. No wind, no rustling leaves, no distant sound of traffic from the nearby highway. Even his own breathing seemed muffled, dampened by the oppressive quiet. John's phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Hope you're having a good day, honey. Emma's excited for spaghetti night. Love you." The normalcy of the message felt like a lifeline to sanity. His wife, his daughter, his regular life where people didn't sink through solid ground and voices didn't come from beneath the earth. He typed back quickly, "Love you too. See you soon." But as he hit send, the screen flickered. For just a moment, instead of Sarah's message, he saw something else. "They're hungry, John. They've been hungry for so long." The text immediately changed back to Sarah's loving words, but John stared at the phone with growing unease. Malfunction. Had to be. Electronics were notoriously unreliable in certain atmospheric conditions. He was clutching at rational explanations, and he knew it. The sound of approaching footsteps made him look up. 2 more rangers were coming down the trail, Martinez and Williams from the look of their silhouettes. John had never been so glad to see backup in his life. "Mitchell," Martinez called out. "What's the situation?" John stood up, brushing dirt off his knees. How could he explain this? How could he tell 2 fellow professionals that he'd watched a woman sink through solid earth like it was quicksand? "Missing hiker," he said, sticking to the basics. "Jessica Collins, mid-20s, blue jacket. I was speaking with her when I lost visual contact." Williams was already pulling out his own equipment. "Any sign of where she might have gone? Off-trail movement?" John pointed to the unremarkable patch of ground. "Last seen here. I've conducted a preliminary search but haven't found any tracks leading away from this location." Martinez knelt down and began examining the area where John indicated. "Ground's pretty packed here. Doesn't look like anyone's been digging or anything." He looked up at John. "You said you were speaking with her when she disappeared? What exactly happened?" The moment of truth. John could stick to vague descriptions and hope the search team found some logical explanation, or he could tell the truth and risk having his sanity questioned. "She was walking toward me on the trail. We exchanged pleasantries about the weather and the hike. I advised her to be careful on the rocks near the bluffs. She acknowledged the advice and took another step forward, and then..." John paused, the words sticking in his throat. "And then what?" Williams prompted. "She sank into the ground right here, like the earth had turned to liquid." The 2 rangers exchanged a look. Martinez stood up slowly, his expression carefully neutral. "John, it's been a long morning. Sometimes in situations like this, I know what I saw." John's voice carried an edge he hadn't intended. "I've been doing this job for 5 years. Before that, 15 years in law enforcement. I don't hallucinate, I don't panic, and I don't make up stories." "Nobody's saying you're making anything up," Williams said diplomatically. "But you've got to admit what you're describing it's not physically possible." "I know it's not physically possible." John's voice was quiet now, strained. "That's the problem." Martinez's radio crackled. "All units, be advised, we're showing some unusual atmospheric readings in your area. Temperature sensors are indicating a significant cold front moving through. Copy that, base. We're definitely feeling the temperature drop out here." John looked around at the frost that was now coating every surface despite the morning sun still shining overhead. At least the temperature change was affecting the equipment. That was something external, measurable, real. "I was in radio contact with her after she disappeared," John said. "Voice contact. She said she was underground, that it was dark and cold. She mentioned seeing others." Williams was setting up a listening device, a sensitive microphone that could pick up sounds from underground. After a few minutes of adjustment, he shook his head. "Not getting anything. If she's down there, she's either unconscious or..." He didn't finish the sentence. Martinez had pulled out a probe, a long metal rod used for detecting soft earth or hidden cavities. He worked systematically across the area, pushing the probe down as far as it would go. Every thrust met solid resistance. "Whatever happened here, there's no cavity underneath. This ground is solid all the way down. John's radio crackled again. Unit 7, this is base. We're getting some unusual reports from other hikers in the area. Multiple people reporting strange sounds and temperature fluctuations. Also, we've had 3 other missing person reports filed in the past hour, all from the same general area. 3 other people. John felt his stomach drop. Base, can you provide details on those reports? Stand by. Okay, we've got a family of 2 who didn't return from a day hike yesterday, and a solo hiker who missed his check-in time this morning. All were planning to use trails in your sector. Martinez and Williams were both listening now, their professional skepticism beginning to crack. Multiple disappearances in the same area was serious business, regardless of how impossible John's account might sound. John, Williams said quietly, walk me through exactly what you saw. Every detail. John closed his eyes, forcing himself to relive those impossible moments. She was walking normally. Her foot came down on solid ground. I could hear the impact. But instead of stopping, her foot kept going down into the earth. No crack, no hole opening up. The ground looked completely normal, but it was like she was sinking into water. How long did it take? Maybe 30 seconds from first contact to when her head disappeared. She was trying to grab onto things, but her hands went right through rocks and roots. I tried to grab her hand, and for a second I did. It felt completely real. But then it slipped through my fingers, and after she disappeared, the ground looked exactly the same. No disturbance, no depression, but the temperature dropped immediately and all the birds stopped singing at once. Martinez had gone very quiet. He was staring at the frozen leaves with an expression John couldn't read. What is it? Williams asked. My grandfather used to tell stories about places like this. Old Cherokee tales about spots in the forest where the earth was thin, where things that shouldn't be possible could happen. Martinez paused. I always thought they were just stories. They are just stories, Williams said firmly. We're dealing with a search and rescue situation here, not folklore. But John could see the doubt in Williams' eyes. The unexplained temperature drop, the multiple disappearances, the absolute silence of the forest. It was adding up to something that couldn't be dismissed as easily as a single witness account. John's phone buzzed again. Another text from Sarah. Everything okay? You usually check in by now. This time the message stayed normal, but John noticed something else. The timestamp showed 11:23 a.m. He checked his watch. 8:47 a.m., a 3.5-hour difference. What time do you guys have? He asked. Martinez checked his watch. 8:47. Williams confirmed the same time. But John's phone, which automatically synchronized with cell towers, was showing a completely different time. And it wasn't just off by a few minutes, it was hours ahead. Base, this is Unit 7. Can you confirm the current time? Unit 7, current time is 08:47 hours. John stared at his phone. As he watched, the timestamp flickered between 8:47 and 11:23, finally settling on the correct time. But the fact that it had shown the wrong time at all sent another chill through him. Time distortions, temperature anomalies, multiple disappearances, and somewhere beneath his feet, Jessica Collins was trapped in a place that shouldn't exist. We need to expand the search, John said. If there are other missing people in this area, we need to find them before... He trailed off, not sure how to finish that sentence. Before what? Before they sank through solid earth too? Before whatever was happening here claimed more victims? Before dark, he finished weakly. But even as he said it, John noticed that the shadows were getting longer. Much longer than they should be at not quite 9 in the morning. The sun, which had been bright and warm when he'd started his patrol, now seemed distant and cold. Martinez was on his radio, calling for additional resources. Ground-penetrating radar, seismic equipment, anything that might explain what was happening. Williams was taking photographs and measurements, documenting everything with professional thoroughness, and John stood in the center of it all, staring at the spot where Jessica had vanished, wondering if his 15-year career in law enforcement and 5 years as a park ranger had prepared him for anything like this. His radio crackled once more. All units in Sector 7 were receiving reports of voices coming from underground throughout the area. Multiple witnesses reporting calls for help from beneath established trails. John keyed his radio. Base, can you clarify those reports? Stand by. We've got at least 6 different locations where hikers are reporting voice contact with people who appear to be trapped underground. However, none of these locations show any sign of ground disturbance or structural collapse. 6 locations. 6 different spots where the impossible was happening. John, Martinez said quietly, I think we need to consider the possibility that we're dealing with something outside normal protocols. What are you suggesting? Martinez looked around at the frost-covered forest, at the unnaturally long shadows, at the electronic equipment that was beginning to malfunction in subtle ways. I'm suggesting that maybe my grandfather's stories weren't just stories. John's rational mind rebelled against the implication, but as he stood there in a forest that had become something alien and threatening, listening to voices from beneath the earth calling for help, he found his skepticism cracking like ice under pressure. Base, he said into his radio. I'm declaring this area a hazard zone. Recommend evacuation of all non-essential personnel until we can determine the nature of the threat. Copy, Unit 7. Evacuation order is in effect. But even as John gave the order, he knew they weren't going to evacuate. They were going to stay in search because somewhere in this impossible place, Jessica Collins and others were trapped and calling for help. And despite everything his rational mind told him about the impossibility of their situation, John Mitchell was going to find them, even if it meant accepting that everything he thought he knew about reality was wrong. The forest around them grew darker, and the voices from below grew fainter. But they didn't stop searching. After all, that's what Rangers did, even when the world stopped making sense. My name is Michael, and at 6:47 a.m. on October 15th, 2018, my radio crackled with the call that would change my life forever. I was sitting in my Ford F-150 Ranger truck, steam rising from my thermos of black coffee, watching the first pale fingers of dawn creep through the towering Douglas firs of Olympic National Forest. The digital clock on my dashboard read 6:47 when dispatch broke through the morning silence with that tone every ranger dreads. Unit 47, we have a code yellow. Missing hiker, female, age 23. Last known position, Hoh River Trail, mile marker 3.2. Family reports she's been missing since yesterday afternoon. My stomach dropped. In my 8 years as a forest ranger, I'd worked dozens of missing person cases. Some ended with relieved families and embarrassed hikers who'd simply taken a wrong turn. Others ended with body bags and trauma counselors. Copy that, dispatch. Unit 47 responding. I keyed the radio with hands that had learned to stay steady through years of emergency calls. Can you give me details on the missing person? Jessica Marie Thompson, 23, University of Washington student. She was solo hiking the Hoh River Trail. Her roommate expected her back by 8 p.m. last night. Vehicle located at Trailhead parking lot. Her family drove up from Seattle this morning. I could hear the exhaustion in Sarah's voice from dispatch. We'd both been at this job long enough to know that after 12 hours in the Olympic wilderness, especially with the temperature dropping to near freezing overnight, the chances of finding someone alive dropped significantly. But I pushed that thought away. At home, my 8-year-old daughter Emma was probably just waking up, and my wife Sarah would be making pancakes like she did every Saturday morning. Emma had slipped a crayon drawing of a rainbow into my jacket pocket yesterday, her little ritual for keeping Daddy safe in the forest. That drawing was pressed against my chest right now, and it reminded me that every missing person was someone's daughter, someone's rainbow. ETA 15 minutes, I radioed back, already pulling onto Forest Service Road 101. The drive to the Hoh River trailhead took me deeper into the heart of the Olympic Peninsula, where cell towers disappeared and the forest grew so thick that even at midday, shadows pooled like black water between the trees. My truck's headlights cut through wisps of fog that clung to the gravel road like ghostly fingers. Something felt wrong from the moment I arrived at the trailhead. The parking lot held only 2 vehicles, Jessica's silver Honda Civic and a black SUV with Washington plates that I assumed belonged to her family. But it was the silence that made my ranger instincts prickle. October in the Olympics should have been alive with the sounds of elk bugling, ravens calling, and the constant drip of moisture from moss-heavy branches. Instead, the forest was utterly, unnaturally quiet. As I stepped out of my truck, the temperature hit me like a physical blow. My breath came out in white puffs, and I could feel the dampness seeping through my Wool Ranger uniform. I checked my gear: GPS unit, emergency radio, first aid kit, emergency bivvy, 72-hour food rations, water purification tablets, signaling mirror, whistle, multi-tool, and my service weapon. Everything a ranger needed for a standard search and rescue operation. Except there was nothing standard about the silence pressing down on this place. A man in his 50s approached from the SUV, his face haggard with sleepless worry. "Are you the ranger? I'm Jessica's father, Robert Thompson. Please, she's been out there all night. The temperature..." His voice cracked. Behind him, a woman who had to be Jessica's mother sat in the passenger seat, clutching a cell phone with white knuckles. Every few seconds, she'd dial a number, listen, then hang up with the hopeless gesture of someone who knew no one would answer. "I'm Ranger Michael Stevens," I said, extending a hand that Robert gripped with desperate strength. "I need you to tell me everything about Jessica's plans yesterday. Every detail could matter." Robert pulled out his phone, showing me their last text exchange. The timestamp read 2:17 p.m. the previous afternoon. "Dad, the forest is so beautiful today. About to head back. Should be home for dinner. Love you." That text had been sent from mile marker 3 to on the Hoh River Trail, exactly where dispatch had said her last known position was. But the Hoh River Trail was a simple out-and-back hike. From mile marker 3.2, it should have taken Jessica less than 2 hours to return to the parking lot. "She's an experienced hiker," Robert continued, his words tumbling over each other. "She knows these trails. She has all the right gear. She wouldn't just disappear." But I'd learned that in the Olympic wilderness, experienced hikers disappeared more often than anyone wanted to admit. The forest had a way of swallowing people, turning familiar trails into mazes, making even GPS units malfunction in the deep valleys where ancient trees blocked satellite signals. I studied Jessica's photo on Robert's phone. She was beautiful in that fresh-faced college way, with shoulder-length brown hair and bright green eyes full of life and confidence, the kind of young woman who probably felt invincible, who wouldn't hesitate to help a stranger or investigate an interesting sound off the main trail. "I'm going to bring her home," I told Robert, meaning every word. The same promise I made to Sarah and Emma every morning when I left for work. I shouldered my pack and headed for the trailhead, my boots crunching on the frost-covered boardwalk that led into the temperate rainforest. The Hoh River Trail was one of the most popular hikes in Olympic National Park, a well-maintained path that wound through groves of massive Sitka spruces and western hemlocks draped in moss that hung like green curtains. But as I walked deeper into the forest, that unnatural silence followed me. My radio crackled with static, then cleared. "Unit 47, this is dispatch. Be advised, we've had 3 other missing person reports in the Olympic Peninsula area over the past 6 months. All young women, all solo hikers. 2 are still missing." The hair on the back of my neck stood up. "Dispatch, can you send me those case files to my mobile unit?" "Negative, Unit 47. You're moving out of digital range, but... Michael..." Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper. "Be careful out there. Something's been wrong in those woods lately. The other rangers have been reporting strange things." The radio dissolved into static before I could ask what she meant. At mile marker 1.5, I found the first sign that Jessica had passed this way. A granola bar wrapper caught on a devil's club thorn beside the trail. I bagged it as evidence, noting the time and GPS coordinates in my logbook. Standard search protocol demanded documentation of everything, no matter how small. But as I continued up the trail, the forest around me began to change in ways that violated everything I knew about Olympic National Park. The moss hanging from the trees seemed to move without any wind. Shadows fell at impossible angles, creating pockets of darkness that my eyes couldn't penetrate even with my high-powered LED flashlight. At mile marker 2, I heard the first whisper. It was so faint I thought it was just the sound of my own breathing. But as I stopped to listen, it came again. A woman's voice calling from somewhere off the trail to my left. The words were indistinct, but the tone was unmistakable. Someone crying for help. Every instinct I had as a ranger screamed at me to investigate. This could be Jessica, injured and lost somewhere in the dense undergrowth. But another instinct, something deeper and more primitive, told me that following that voice would be a mistake. I compromised by calling out, Jessica Thompson, this is Ranger Stevens. If you can hear me, keep making noise. I'm coming to find you." The response chilled my blood. The crying stopped abruptly, replaced by silence so complete it felt like a physical weight pressing against my eardrums. Then, from the same direction, came the sound of laughter. Not the relieved laughter of someone who'd just been rescued, but something else. Something that didn't sound entirely human. If this story is giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Michael's situation? Comment below. I forced myself to continue up the trail, my hand resting on the grip of my service weapon. At mile marker 3, the path crossed a wooden bridge over a creek that shouldn't have been there. I'd hiked this trail dozens of times over the years, and there had never been a creek at this location. But here it was, dark water flowing silently beneath boards that looked like they'd been weathered by decades of rain. My GPS unit began malfunctioning, the screen flickering between my actual coordinates and impossible readings that placed me miles underground. The digital compass spun wildly, unable to find magnetic north. Even my watch seemed to be running slow, the second hand stuttering between tick marks. That's when I found Jessica's backpack. It was sitting upright in the middle of the trail at mile marker 3.2, positioned so carefully it might have been placed there by a museum curator. The bright blue REI pack was completely dry despite the morning dew that covered everything else in the forest. Jessica's water bottles were still full. Her food was untouched. Her emergency whistle and bear spray remained clipped to the pack's exterior loops. But Jessica herself was nowhere to be seen. I called her name again, my voice echoing strangely in the unnatural quiet. As I bent to examine the backpack, I noticed something that made my hands shake. There were no footprints around it. None. The soft earth of the trail should have been marked by Jessica's boots by her walking up to this spot and setting down her pack. Instead, the ground was smooth, as if the pack had simply materialized there. That's when I saw her for the first time. At the edge of my vision, barely visible through the gaps between massive tree trunks, stood a woman in white. Even at a distance, I could see that her dress was stained with something dark. She was too far away for me to make out her features, but I could feel her watching me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Ma'am," I called out, my voice cracking slightly. "Ma'am, are you all right? Do you need assistance?" The woman in white didn't respond. She simply stood there, motionless as the trees around her. But as I watched, she began to move closer, gliding between the massive trunks with movements that seemed to ignore the laws of physics. She didn't step over fallen logs or push through the undergrowth. She simply moved, flowing like mist, always keeping just at the edge of clear sight. Every rational part of my mind was screaming that this was just another hiker. Maybe someone who'd gotten lost and was too traumatized to respond properly. But something about the way she moved, the absolute wrongness of her presence in this place, triggered every survival instinct I'd developed in 8 years of forest work. I reached for my radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. I've located the missing hiker's equipment at mile marker 3.2. Requesting immediate backup and a full search team." Static answered me. Complete, dead static. I tried my cell phone, knowing it was useless this deep in the forest. No signal as expected. But the screen showed something impossible. The time was 2:17 p.m., the exact moment Jessica had sent her last text message. But that was impossible. I'd been hiking for hours. It should have been past noon, not mid-afternoon. When I looked up from my phone, the woman in white was closer. She stood perhaps 50 yards away now, just visible through the grove of ancient hemlocks. Her dress was definitely stained with something dark that looked wet despite the dry weather. Her hair hung in long, dark strands that covered most of her face, but I could see pale skin and the suggestion of features that might once have been beautiful. "Ma'am, I'm a forest ranger," I called out, my voice steadier than I felt. "If you're injured, I can help you. Do you know anything about a missing hiker named Jessica Thompson?" This time, the woman in white responded. She raised one pale hand and pointed deeper into the forest, toward an area where the trees grew so thick that even my flashlight couldn't penetrate the darkness between them. Then she mouthed a single word that I somehow heard despite the distance between us. "Come." Every procedure manual I'd ever studied, every training course I'd taken, every instinct developed through years of search and rescue work told me not to follow. You never left the established trail during a search operation. You never went alone into unmarked wilderness. You never followed strangers into areas where backup couldn't reach you. But somewhere in that dark forest was Jessica Thompson, a 23-year-old college student whose parents were sitting in a parking lot, desperately waiting for news that their daughter was safe. And the woman in white might be the only person who knew where Jessica was. I made the decision that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I left the trail. The forest closed around me like a living thing as I pushed through undergrowth that seemed designed to snag and tear at my uniform. Thorns caught at my jacket, and more than once I had to use my multi-tool to cut through vines that blocked my path. The deeper I went, the darker it became, until I was forced to use my flashlight even though my watch still insisted it was mid-afternoon. The woman in white stayed always just ahead of me, visible enough to follow but never close enough to speak to directly. She moved through the forest without making a sound, never disturbing a single branch or leaving a footprint in the soft earth. After what felt like hours of following her deeper into the wilderness, I emerged into a clearing that shouldn't have existed. It was perfectly circular, perhaps 30 feet across, surrounded by trees so tall and ancient they must have been growing here when the first European explorers reached the Pacific coast. But it wasn't the age of the trees that made my blood run cold. It was what lay in the center of the clearing. A small cabin sat in the exact middle of the space, its walls built from logs that had weathered to the color of old bones. The roof was covered in moss so thick it looked like green fur, and the single window was dark as a dead eye. But it was the front door that made my hands shake as I reached for my weapon. The door was painted white, but the paint was stained and splattered with something that looked like dried blood. And hanging from the door's rusty handle was a piece of fabric I recognized immediately, bright blue nylon from an REI backpack. "Jessica!" I shouted, my voice echoing strangely in the circular clearing. "Jessica, are you in there?" The cabin remained silent, but the woman in white finally turned to face me fully. What I saw destroyed every rational explanation my mind had been trying to construct. Her face was beautiful, or had been once, but now it was the beauty of something that had been dead for a very long time. Her skin was the color of milk, with dark veins visible beneath the surface. Her eyes were completely black, not just the irises, but the entire eye, as if someone had filled the sockets with oil. But it was her smile that nearly sent me running back into the forest, her lips pulled back to reveal teeth that were too sharp, too numerous and stained with something dark. "She's waiting for you," the woman in white said, her voice carrying across the clearing despite the fact that her lips never moved. The words seemed to come from the air itself, from the trees, from the very ground beneath my feet. "She's been waiting so long." I drew my service weapon, though some part of me knew that bullets would be useless against whatever this thing was. "Where is Jessica Thompson? What have you done with her?" The woman in white laughed, a sound like wind chimes made of broken glass. "I haven't done anything to her, not yet. But the sun is setting, and when full darkness comes, she'll join us. She'll become one of the lost ones wandering these woods forever." "Us?" I managed to ask. "All the girls who came before. All the daughters and sisters and girlfriends who thought they were safe in daylight, who believed their technology and their knowledge would protect them." The woman's black eyes fixed on mine. "But the forest is older than their GPS devices, older than their emergency beacons, and some things that die in these woods don't stay dead." That's when I heard it. A faint scratching sound coming from inside the cabin. The sound of fingernails clawing against wood, desperate and rhythmic. Someone was alive in there, trapped and trying to get out. I ran toward the cabin, my boots pounding against earth that felt spongy and wrong beneath my feet. Behind me, the woman in white began to laugh again, but the sound was changing, becoming something that no human throat could produce. The cabin door was locked, but 8 years of emergency response training had taught me how to handle locked doors. I put my shoulder against the weathered wood and pushed with all my strength. The door splintered inward, releasing a smell that hit me like a physical blow. The smell of fear sweat, of unwashed bodies, of something rotting in the darkness. Inside the cabin, I found Jessica. She was alive, but barely. Tied to a chair in the center of the single room, her clothes torn and dirty, her eyes wide with terror that had pushed her beyond the edge of sanity. When she saw me, she tried to scream, but only a hoarse whisper came out. "It's okay," I said, holstering my weapon and pulling out my multi-tool to cut her bonds. "I'm Ranger Stevens. Your parents sent me to find you. You're safe now." But even as I said the words, I knew they weren't true. The scratching sound I'd heard wasn't coming from Jessica trying to escape. It was coming from the walls around us, as if something with very long fingernails was trying to claw its way inside. "She comes at night," Jessica whispered as I freed her hands. "Every night, she brings the others." "Others?" Jessica's eyes rolled toward the back corner of the cabin, and I followed her gaze with my flashlight. What I saw there made me understand why 3 other young women had gone missing in these woods over the past 6 months. They were still here. 3 other women sat in chairs identical to Jessica's, but they'd been here much longer. Their clothes had rotted away to tatters. Their skin had taken on the same milk-white pallor as the woman outside, and their eyes were completely black, and they were all smiling with teeth that were too sharp. "She's collecting us," Jessica whispered, "building her family. And when the sun goes down tonight, I'll become like them." Through the cabin's single window, I could see that the light was indeed fading. My watch now read 6:30 p.m., though I could have sworn it was afternoon just moments ago. Outside, the woman in white was no longer alone. Other figures moved between the trees, all wearing the same stained white dresses, all with the same black eyes and sharp smiles. That's when my training kicked in. 8 years of search and rescue had taught me that in emergency situations, you don't think about the impossible. You focus on what needs to be done. Jessica was alive, and she was my responsibility. Everything else was secondary. I helped Jessica to her feet, surprised by how light she felt, as if whatever had been done to her had somehow made her less substantial. "We're leaving. Right now." "You can't," she whispered. "The forest won't let us leave. I've tried. Every day I've tried." "How long have you been here?" "Forever," she said, and I realized that to someone who'd been trapped in this cabin with 3 corpses for company, forever might be exactly what it felt like. But when I checked my GPS unit, something impossible showed on the screen. According to the device, we weren't in Olympic National Forest at all. We were somewhere that didn't exist on any map, coordinates that placed us in empty ocean hundreds of miles from shore. I thought of Emma's drawing in my pocket, of Sarah making pancakes in our warm kitchen, of the promise I'd made to bring Jessica home. Sometimes love is stronger than fear, stronger than the impossible, stronger than things that shouldn't exist but do anyway. "Hold on to me," I told Jessica. "And whatever happens, don't let go." We stepped out of the cabin together into a world that had become something from a nightmare. The clearing was filled with women in white dresses, dozens of them all watching us with those terrible black eyes. They stood motionless as statues, forming a perfect circle around the cabin, blocking every path back into the forest. The original woman in white, the one I'd followed here, stepped forward. Up close, I could see that the stains on her dress weren't just blood. They were everything that had once made her human. All the messy, beautiful, imperfect things that separated the living from the dead. "You can join us willingly," she said, her voice echoing from every direction at once. "Or you can run, and we'll hunt you through these woods until your heart bursts from fear. But you cannot leave. No one leaves." I drew my weapon again, knowing it was useless but needing the weight of it in my hand. "We're walking out of here." Right now, the woman in white smiled, showing those horrible teeth. Men have tried to save them before. Forest rangers, police officers, fathers and brothers and boyfriends. They all became part of our collection eventually. That's when I noticed the other shapes moving between the trees at the edge of the clearing. Not women in white dresses, but men in rotting uniforms. Park rangers, sheriff's deputies, even what looked like a military uniform from decades past. All with the same black eyes, all with the same sharp smiles. The forest is hungry, the woman in white continued. It feeds on love, on hope, on the desperate need to save someone. And you, Michael Stevens, father of Emma, husband of Sarah, you're full of love. You'll taste so sweet when you join us. She knew my family's names. Somehow, this thing knew about Emma and Sarah. That's when I understood what I was really fighting. This wasn't just about Jessica anymore. This was about every person I'd ever loved, every promise I'd ever made, every reason I had to keep breathing. If I failed here, if I became one of those shambling corpses in ranger uniforms, then someday Sarah might come looking for me. Someday, Emma might grow up and become one of the women in white dresses. I thought about Emma's drawing in my pocket, about the rainbow she'd colored so carefully, about her little voice saying, "To keep Daddy safe in the forest," and suddenly I knew what I had to do. "You're right," I told the woman in white. "Love is what brought me here, but you made one mistake." "What mistake?" I pulled Emma's drawing from my pocket, holding it up so all the dead things in the clearing could see it. The paper seemed to glow in the fading light, the bright colors somehow more real than anything else in this place. "You think love makes us weak, but love is what makes us human, and being human means we don't give up. Ever." The woman in white smile faltered. Around the clearing, the other figures began to step backward, as if the drawing was something they couldn't approach. "That's just paper," the woman said, but her voice had lost its supernatural echo. "Children's scribbles." "This is a rainbow," I said, holding the drawing higher. "My daughter drew it to keep me safe. And you know what a rainbow is? It's light breaking through darkness. It's hope after the storm. It's the promise that no matter how bad things get, something beautiful is coming." The forest around us began to change. The unnatural darkness was lifting, replaced by the honest gray of actual dusk in the Olympic Peninsula. The ancient trees were just trees again, massive and beautiful but not malevolent, and the women in white dresses, they were fading, becoming translucent. "This isn't possible," the woman in white whispered, her form flickering like a candle in the wind. "Everything's possible when you have something to fight for," I said, taking Jessica's hand. "And I have a family waiting for me at home." The woman in white let out a shriek that shattered the unnatural silence of the clearing, a sound of pure rage and hunger and loss. But she was already fading, her form dissolving into mist that dispersed among the trees. One by one, the other figures followed her into whatever darkness had spawned them, until Jessica and I stood alone in a clearing that was just a clearing, surrounded by trees that were just trees. My GPS unit flickered back to life, showing our actual coordinates, 2.3 miles northeast of the Hoh River Trail, well within the mapped boundaries of Olympic National Forest. My radio crackled with static, then cleared. "Unit 47, this is dispatch. Please respond. We've lost contact with you for the past 4 hours. 4 hours. According to my watch, we'd been gone for less than 1. Dispatch, this is Unit 47. I have the missing hiker. Jessica Thompson is alive and in need of medical attention, but she's mobile. We're heading back to the trailhead now." The hike back to the parking lot took exactly as long as it should have, following game trails and compass bearings that led us directly to the Hoh River Trail. Jessica didn't speak during the entire journey, but she held my hand with desperate strength, as if letting go might send her back to that cabin with its terrible occupants. When we emerged from the forest, Robert and Mrs. Thompson were waiting exactly where I'd left them. The reunion was everything a ranger hopes for: tears of joy, desperate hugs, and the kind of relief that makes all the risk worthwhile. But as the paramedics checked Jessica's vital signs and Robert shook my hand with tears streaming down his face, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Mrs. Thompson was holding her cell phone, showing me the last text message Jessica had sent. The timestamp still read 2:17 p.m., but the message was different. Instead of "Dad, the forest is so beautiful today. About to head back. Should be home for dinner. Love you." The screen now showed, "Help me. She won't let me leave. The woman in white has us all." I never told anyone about that message. What would be the point? Jessica was safe, reunited with her family, receiving the medical care she needed. The official report stated that she'd suffered exposure and dehydration after becoming lost off trail, leading to confusion and possible hallucinations. But I know what I saw in that clearing. I know about the cabin with its terrible occupants, about the woman in white and her collection of the lost. And sometimes on foggy mornings when I'm driving the Forest Service roads, I catch glimpses of white dresses between the trees. The other missing women were never found. Their cases remain open, filed under presumed dead due to misadventure. But I know they're still out there somewhere in the vast wilderness of the Olympic Peninsula, waiting for the next lost hiker to stumble into their web. Jessica recovered eventually. She transferred to a university in Arizona as far from the forest as she could get. She sends me a Christmas card every year, always with the same message: "Thank you for bringing me home." But she never signs her name, and the return address is always different. Sometimes I wonder if I really saved her that day, or if something else came back with us from that clearing. Something that wears Jessica's face but has black eyes and sharp teeth when no one is looking. I've never told Sarah about any of this. How could I? But I've made sure Emma understands that if she ever gets lost in the woods, she should never follow strangers who promise to help her find her way. And I've taught her that if she ever sees a woman in a white dress in the forest, she should run. Because love brought me into those woods and love brought me out. But some things that hunger for love are older than human kindness, and they're always watching from between the trees, waiting for the next person who cares enough to follow them into the darkness. The woman in white is still out there, and she's still collecting. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like, if you want more terrifying ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror, and comment your theory about what really happened to Jessica. I read every single one. Olympic National Forest, Washington, October 15, 2018. Matthew Rodriguez adjusted the straps of his weathered 5.11 tactical pack, the familiar weight of 43 pounds of emergency gear settling against his spine like an old friend. The Garmin GPS 60 Forest clip to his belt showed 14:32 hours. He'd been searching for Nicole Patterson for 6 hours straight, and the October afternoon was bleeding away faster than he liked. His Danner pronghorn boots found purchase on the moss-slick granite as he crested another ridge, radio static crackling from his Motorola APX 6000. Base, this is Rodriguez. Grid 7 Alpha clear, moving to 7 Bravo. The response came back distorted, words swallowed by the thick canopy above. Something about the radio had been off all day, subtle interference that made his 15 years of ranger experience itch between his shoulder blades like a warning. The scent of Douglas fir and decomposing alder leaves filled his nostrils, but underneath lay something else. Something that didn't belong in these woods he knew better than his own neighborhood. Sweet and cloying, like incense mixed with something metallic. Matthew paused, hand instinctively moving to the Streamlight ProTac HL on his duty belt, though daylight still filtered through the canopy and amber shafts that would make his daughter Emma squeal with delight during their weekend hikes. Nicole Patterson, 24, psychology student from University of Washington, last seen on the Hoh River Trail at 0800 this morning by her boyfriend, who'd stayed behind at camp with a sprained ankle. Standard missing hiker case, except nothing about this felt standard. The boyfriend's story checked out. Too many details, too much genuine panic. But Nicole's trail had vanished completely after mile marker 3, as if she'd simply evaporated into the Olympic wilderness. Matthew's weathered hands, scarred from 2 decades of outdoor work, adjusted his radio again. The static was getting worse, forming patterns that almost sounded like chanting. He shook his head, blaming fatigue and the psychological weight of a missing person case. His phone buzzed. A text from Linda. "Dinner at 6. Emma made you a drawing of a forest ranger saving people. She says you're her hero. Stay safe, mi amor." The warmth of home felt 1,000 miles away as Matthew studied the terrain ahead. The trail markers seemed wrong somehow, not missing, but relocated. His compass, a reliable Silva Ranger that had never failed him, spun lazily before settling on a bearing that contradicted his GPS. In 15 years of search and rescue, Matthew had pulled 43 people out of these woods alive, found the remains of 7 others, and prided himself on his ability to read the forest like a book. But today the forest was writing in a language he didn't recognize. Movement caught his peripheral vision, a flash of red flannel between the trees. Matthew's pulse quickened. "Nicole!" His voice echoed off the ridge walls, swallowed by the unnatural silence that had settled over the woods. No bird calls, no rustle of small animals. Just the soft whisper of wind through needles that sounded almost like voices if he listened too carefully. He pushed through a stand of western hemlock, following the red flash deeper into terrain that wasn't on any of his topographical maps. The trees grew closer together here, their trunks bearing scars that looked almost intentional. Geometric patterns carved into bark, symbols that made his eyes water if he stared too long. The sweet incense smell grew stronger, mixed now with the unmistakable scent of wood smoke. Matthew's radio crackled to life. "Rodriguez. Anyone. Coordinates. Ominous." The words fragmented into static, but the voice sounded wrong, too calm, almost amused. He tried to respond, but his radio only produced a low humming sound that seemed to resonate through his chest cavity like a tuning fork. Through the trees ahead, smoke rose in a thin column against the darkening sky. Not a campfire, too controlled, too deliberate. Matthew unsnapped the retention strap on his duty weapon, a Glock 22 that suddenly felt inadequate against whatever was waiting in the clearing ahead. His breathing quickened, each exhale visible in air that had grown cold despite the mild afternoon temperature. As he approached the smoke source, Matthew heard it clearly now. Voices chanting in harmonious unison, words in a language that predated any European settlement of the Pacific Northwest. The rhythm pulsed like a heartbeat, like the drums he remembered from Linda's family reunions, but darker, older, hungry. The clearing opened before him like a wound in the forest floor. 7 figures in dark robes stood in a perfect circle around a stone altar that definitely hadn't been there during his last patrol of this area 3 weeks ago. The stones were massive, clearly ancient, covered in the same geometric symbols he'd seen carved into the trees. Nicole Patterson knelt in the center, alive but motionless, her hiking clothes replaced by a simple white dress that seemed to glow in the firelight. Matthew's training kicked in despite the surreal scene before him. Multiple suspects, potential hostage situation, backup unavailable due to radio malfunction. His hand moved to his weapon, but stopped as one of the robed figures turned toward him. The hood fell back, revealing the face of Deputy Chief Ranger Thomas Morrison, Matthew's supervisor for the past 8 years, the man who'd recommended him for his last promotion. "Matthew," Morrison's voice carried easily across the clearing, warm and familiar despite the circumstances. "You're right on time. We've been waiting for you." The other figures lowered their hoods, revealing faces Matthew recognized. Dr. Sarah Chen from the Forest Service Research Station, Bill Hutchins from the local search and rescue volunteer crew, Janet Clearwater from the Tribal Liaison Office, and 3 others he'd worked alongside for years. People he trusted, people he'd shared coffee with, complained about budget cuts with, celebrated successful rescues with. "What the hell is this, Tom?" Matthew's voice came out steady despite the adrenaline surge making his hands shake. "Let the girl go. Whatever this is, we can work it out." Morrison smiled, and in that expression Matthew saw something that had never been there in 8 years of working together. Something ancient and patient and utterly inhuman, wearing his supervisor's face like a mask. "Oh, Matthew, you still don't understand. There is no girl. There never was a Nicole Patterson." The figure kneeling at the altar raised its head, and Matthew's world tilted sideways. The face looking back at him was Linda's, His wife's warm brown eyes, her gentle smile, but wrong in ways his mind refused to process. "Hello, mi amor," it said in Linda's voice. "I've been waiting so long for you to find me." Matthew's radio burst to life with Emma's 8-year-old voice. "Daddy, why did you leave us? Why won't you come home?" Behind him, branches snapped as more robed figures emerged from the tree line, their faces hidden but their movements coordinated with predatory precision. Matthew's compass spun wildly before the needle snapped off entirely. His GPS screen flickered and died. Even his watch had stopped, the hands frozen at 3:33. "The forest has been calling to you, Matthew," Morrison continued, stepping closer. "For years it's been calling. Every rescue, every successful mission, every life you've saved, payment against this debt. But the balance is due now." The chanting resumed, louder now, and Matthew realized with crystal clarity that he had two choices. Surrender to whatever these people, these things wearing familiar faces, wanted from him, or fight his way out of this impossible situation with his service weapon and his decades of wilderness experience. His phone buzzed one last time. A text from an unknown number. "Your family is safe, for now. Choose wisely, Ranger Rodriguez." The flames around the altar began to dance higher, casting shadows that moved independently of their sources, and Matthew Rodriguez, veteran of the Olympic National Forest, prepared to discover just how far down the rabbit hole his beloved wilderness could drag him. In the distance, something that might have been a wolf howled with Emma's voice, calling for her daddy to come home. If this story is giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Matthew's situation? Comment below. Holy crap, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Hit like if you want more terrifying forest ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror, and comment your theory about what really happened to Nicole. I read every single one.